First Canadian Place has been the tallest building in Canada since 1975. This tower has loomed 298 metres over Toronto for more than 50 years. But FCP is about to lose its crown. Just 5 minutes down the road, Pinnacle SkyTower is getting ready to open as Canada's first ever supertall skyscraper. At 352 metres, it soars high above its ageing counterpart, setting a precedent in the city. And that's just the beginning. Until 2026, Canada had never been home to a supertall, and now 11 have been put forward in Toronto, with 3 already under construction. A city that's already densely populated with great steel towers is about to see its skyline totally transform. But the burning question I have is, why is Canada suddenly starting to build supertall skyscrapers now? Supertall skyscrapers aren't exactly a new phenomenon. We can trace their origins all the way back to 1930s New York and one of the most famous sites in the world, the Chrysler Building. In the century that's followed, another 24 countries have all added supertalls to their skylines. And yet Canada, a world leader in building tall towers, has none. Which is strange, because Toronto has the third most skyscrapers of any city in North America, behind only New York and Chicago. That's 16th place worldwide. And those two cities have 25 supertalls between them. So it begs a very big question. Why has the Great White North decided that now is the time to break the 300-metre mark? Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, it all centres on Toronto's rapid development. Thanks to its position in North America as a hub for business, Toronto has experienced multiple office building booms, particularly in the 20th century. The skyline has completely transformed as downtown densified in a bid to support the rapidly expanding workforce welcomed in from all over the world. In fact, until recently, Toronto had the fastest growing population on the continent. But as the workforce grew, so too did the need for homes. And as is often the case with housing, supply struggled to keep up with demand. A huge number of those working in the city ran for the suburbs as a solution, which now sprawls for miles. But that caused its own issue. The suburban dwellers still had to get into the city for work. Commute times became hellish as infrastructure investment lagged behind demand. And that left people with only one option: their cars. And if you want to know more about that nightmare, then we've got a few videos that cover it. So here we are in 2026, with Toronto providing a massive 20% of the country's GDP, but unable to house some of its residents.
Experts are now saying the housing market is so bad it is officially impossible for a regular person with a regular job to buy a house in Toronto.
Everybody is looking at it as like the example of one of the worst housing markets on earth.
There is no end in sight to the real estate meltdown in Ontario, Canada.
Time for a rethink. Billions of dollars are already being spent to overhaul infrastructure, and now there's a turn towards the skies, which is exactly where the Pinnacle SkyTower comes in. If you look at them from above, then a lot of skyscrapers are shaped like this. Now, from a practicality standpoint, a square layout makes sense for a whole host of reasons. But the SkyTower is shaking things up. Its floor plan is a 12-sided polygon that really maximizes the view. And it got me thinking, even though my office has got this pretty cool lighting, I could kind of do with an upgrade. And the natural light you see streaming into those SkyTower apartments could really pop on camera. Now, I've worked on my fair share of floor plans over the years, but recently I've been tied up writing a Sunday Times best-selling book and building a kick-ass YouTube channel. Luckily, with RoomSketcher's AI tool, I can turn this complicated 2D layout into an accurate, editable 3D floor plan in a matter of seconds. Their interface is entirely user-friendly, meaning it takes no time at all for me to plan out my new recording studio. And I can just drag and drop this standing desk right here by the window, looking out over Lake Ontario. Because even in a multi-million-dollar condo, health is wealth. Now, granted, persuading my entire family to relocate to Canada just so I can upgrade my office might be a little bit tricky. But RoomSketcher's got me covered there too. I can create 2D and 3D floor plans, 3D walkthroughs, and even photorealistic 3D images to really help sell the vision. And they don't just look great, they're so accurate that you can have full confidence whether you're designing a dream home or walking your crew through an upcoming project. So whether you're an expert, a newbie, or somewhere in the middle, you can try RoomSketcher for free today. Just scan the QR code on screen or click the link down in the video description. We wouldn't be able to make these videos without amazing video sponsors like RoomSketcher, so please do go and check them out and let us know how you get on. Now, while I carry on fantasizing about my dream office space, here is what Toronto's new Pinnacle SkyTower is actually going to look like. The 352-metre Pinnacle SkyTower is balanced on a podium, a sturdy grounding for Canada's tallest ever building. It means the tower itself actually starts around level 13. As it climbs, it's centred around an incredibly robust reinforced concrete core supported by link beams and shear walls. The base initially features an almost rectangular footprint and then slims as it rises to become a 12-sided polygon. That serves two key purposes. First of all, it looks fantastic. If you're going to develop the tallest building in a city, then you kind of have an obligation to make it stunning. The second purpose is to tackle the intense wind pressures caused by Lake Ontario and the plethora of tall structures throughout downtown Toronto.
It's a little windy today in Toronto.
Because we have a dense core and we have a lot of buildings adjacent to each other, the modeling of that wind changes when more buildings are added, right? So this is something that's been coming up a bit in Toronto, where because the development is happening so fast, you may model your building for a certain wind condition, but then all of a sudden there's an approval for a building close by, and you may have to adjust your modeling to then suit those future conditions in the case that those buildings come up.
SkyTower is just one of a number of skyscrapers being built in this city, and with 10 more supertalls currently proposed or under development, future-proofing is no easy task. In fact, this building has been so technical to develop that architects went through 70 different rounds of drawings just for the curtain wall system. Sharp edges tend to stop wind from gently slowing past, instead causing turbulent, swirling patterns. And so the file design here sees 12 notch sides acting as a kind of giant diffuser for the wind. As powerful gusts hurtle towards the structure, they flow around the smooth edges to limit interference. Cutting the impact of the wind on the outside of the building is crucial, but it's not where the challenge ends. Thanks to the harsh, cold breeze that blows in off Lake Ontario, towers along the water's edge are battling what feels like minus 20-degree gusts, around minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit. As they hit the building, they get sucked up into the vertical shafts, haunting the interior by pushing and pulling at doors and windows. Architects and engineers had to painstakingly model every single door in SkyTower to check for wind pressures and make adjustments where needed. One of the fixes was to divide the staircases into 4 quadrants or chunks.
Each chunk sort of on the day-to-day is isolated from the other, so you don't have a vertical shaft where wind can just carry up. And then in a fire event, because all those doors have to open as part of our code, we had a pressure relief system where pressure sensors are installed in the stair. And if you get too high of pressures in the stair that affect doors at the top, then we have pressure relief corridors that would relieve that and balance that pressure.
Public and residential floors extend up to the 106th level, and then on 108 is a tuned mass damper stretching upwards by a whopping 9 metres. That's connected to a concrete slab that's half a metre deep, and it acts like a giant pendulum to counter the sway of the building, a bit like the one you see here. It's an enormous piece of kit weighing 500 tonnes. Now, this TMD is so big that you can't just lift it up in one go. There's no crane strong enough to do that in this instance. So what has to happen is the TMD is broken into pieces and then over a series of months is lifted up and reassembled at the top of the building. Now, as Nadine explained, working out the impacts of wind on a tower like this in Toronto is incredibly tricky. Development here is a constantly moving feast. Skyscrapers are going up left, right and centre, and as we've been talking about, a lot of them are going to climb to super tall proportions. But while that might impact the finished product, years into the construction process, SkyTower architects and engineers had to pivot to account for a monumental adaptation.
The footprint of the base is the size of the entire site, basically, which is typical for Toronto. We usually max out the site area below grade for parking and foundations. So the foundation was set by the size of the site and was set for a 95-story building. But then after the excavation had started and after the footings had sort of been established, the developer decided they wanted to go up another 10 floors.
Back in 2017, when approval was originally granted, SkyTower was set to be 40 metres shorter. But as the years rolled on and developments nearby grew ever taller, Pinnacle wanted to make sure their tower would really stand out, hence successfully gaining approval 2 years into construction to give their building a bit of a growth spurt. Now, it might sound simple, just stretch the plans up 40 metres and we're all good. But it's nothing like that. What we're talking about here is months of redesign work. For starters, to add extra floors to the building, the podium had to be widened above grade to spread the base and fix the adjusted slenderness ratio of the whole structure.
This building is quite tall and limited by its base, so kind of widening out that podium as much as possible, yet treating it quite elegantly. All of the current corners are kind of curving and terracing upwards, so it transitions its way up to the sort of form of the tower. And then you've got these nice buttressed corners which sort of take that form back to its final location.
The tower originally featured a tapering of the bottom 10 floors, but that had to be scrapped to keep it straight and support the extended base. And while it might have been an exhausting process, the proof is in the pudding. SkyTower is the tallest building in Canada. So I've explained a bit about the major housing crisis and the sprawling suburbs, but that doesn't really answer why Toronto has turned to supertalls now. The downtown core faces the same issues that all major urban areas come up against eventually, a lack of space. Although that doesn't mean all of its towers are full. The city is littered with underutilised office buildings and condos. Let's talk about those offices first of all. Like I said earlier, throughout the 20th century, there were multiple office construction booms. As the city's population climbed, these great towers went up to offer commercial working space. Downtown is now full of office buildings. The problem is that following the pandemic, Canada introduced stricter immigration controls and its population is now declining. Compare that with the new work-from-home mentality, and as of last year, there was a 15% vacancy rate in downtown offices, compared to just 2.5% pre-pandemic. Now, those office towers are getting old, and replacing them is pretty challenging. Existing city bylaws say that any demolished office buildings downtown have to be replaced with more offices. And while not impossible, overcoming that hurdle has historically been a bit of a minefield. And so, with the financial demand for office towers shrinking, these ageing structures are kind of just stuck there. Although the policy has now been relaxed after a review. But what about those empty condos? Well, over the last decade, they've accounted for half of all new housing built in the city. The perfect concoction of low interest rates, a rising population, and rising property prices meant that investor demand went crazy. Developers built condos left, right and centre, knowing they could flog the units through pre-sales to investors. And investors were more than happy to oblige. They could buy up apartments at a cheaper rate before they went onto the market and then naturally increased in value. On average, between 2015 and 2022, units rose in price by more than 40% between when investors would buy them and then when they'd sell them again.
What's that smell?
The cologne?
No.
Opportunity.
No. Money.
Cha-ching. However, following the pandemic, Toronto's population didn't grow anywhere near as quickly, and interest rates soared. The financial return for investors crashed, and so pre-sales plummeted. But as you might have guessed, building a condo tower isn't an overnight process. It takes years of planning and approvals, and so towers continued to climb in the city, even though the demand had shrunk. In response, developers began to build very small condo units that could be sold to investors at a lower, more attractive price.
Oh my god, that is very small.
This is actually a lot larger than many of the micro condos they've made over the last few years.
And while they're not big enough for families, for temporary residents and students not looking to settle in a home for the long term, those small apartments kind of work a treat. But, as we've already covered, the population started to drop, and so even for these micro homes, demand began to dwindle. The Bank of Canada has estimated micro units make up 60% of new apartments coming onto the market, but of new households, only 30% would typically be appropriate to buy them. The market is oversaturated with small apartments that don't really offer enough to the city. And that messy, windy road brings us all the way back to the birth of the supertall skyscraper in Toronto. Their appearance on the scene is partially a result of a surge in planning and construction during and immediately after the pandemic. But now, post-pandemic, these buildings are having to respond to a very different world, generating very different demands. For a developer, the more economic drivers you can fit into a tower, the more financially safe it becomes. You won't end up stuck with a building full of one asset class that you can't fill. So with demand for offices having slipped dramatically, and with 18 condo projects cancelled in the city in the year leading up to January 2026, basically, we're now looking at a mixed-use world, which is proven by the fact that all three of the supertalls being built right now in this city feature multiple asset classes. We're talking offices, apartments, hotels, shops and restaurants. And to fit all of that into one building, you need a lot of space. Sometimes it's as simple as land on the ground is expensive and land in the sky is cheaper. Couple that with developers forever wanting their tower to be the tallest or flashiest in the city, and it's no surprise that Canada's started building skyscrapers over 300 meters tall. By next year, the SkyTower should be joined by Concord Sky, and then a year after that by One Bloor West, formerly known as the One. 3 supertall skyscrapers are navigating their way onto Toronto's skyline, and they could be joined by another 8 in the coming years. But as we've seen, successfully constructing a tower of this height is no mean feat. And while it's taken national population policy changes, global economic fluctuations, and even a pandemic, Toronto is now following a path laid by various other cities around the world. What lies in wait for these towers once they're opened is all a part of the gamble. Whether they become economic successes that really add to the skyline, or glass boxes that just perpetuate the housing crisis, only time will tell. One thing is for certain. A precedent has been set for building supertall skyscrapers in Canada. And this is only the beginning. This video was sponsored by RoomSketcher. Don't forget that if Toronto's building spree has inspired you, you can try out RoomSketcher for free yourself today by scanning the QR code on screen or clicking the link below. And as always guys, if you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.